Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we bring you a tale of family, betrayal, and the fight for self-empowerment. In this gripping story, a woman finds herself branded as the family's burden by those she once called her own. But when the weight of her family's secrets is revealed, she embarks on a journey to reclaim her identity and rewrite her future. Will she survive the lies that have defined her for years? Or will she emerge stronger than ever? Stay tuned to hear the story of one woman's struggle to break free from the shadows of her past. Subscribe to our channel to start today's story. It was a night that could have been a celebration. A night that should have been one. The grand opening of Anderson Enterprises was meant to be the crowning moment of my father's legacy. A reflection of his hard work, vision, and the empire he had built. The elegant venue was lit by glimmering chandeliers, the floor beneath my feet gleaming like polished glass, and the sound of clinking champagne glasses was almost melodic, like the cheers of a world that revered success. But to me, this night was far from a triumph, it was a prison. A performance, a moment I could not escape from. I stood there, surrounded by the wealthy and powerful, each face more perfect than the last. They wore smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Conversations filled with polite compliments and business deals disguised as pleasantries. In the midst of it all, I stood with my name tag pinned to my dress. A name tag that shouldn't have felt as heavy as it did. But it did. Anna Anderson. It read. But underneath it, in delicate script that seemed almost too cruel, it added, the family's burden. I didn't know who had decided to make this my label. I didn't care. All I knew was that it was there. For everyone to see. And everyone did see. They didn't need to ask. They already knew. The ones who mattered. The ones who had shaped this world I was trapped in, had seen it. And their amusement was evident. Even if it wasn't openly acknowledged. My father, Edward Anderson, stood across the room, surrounded by Chicago's elite, laughing at some joke an investor had made. His presence commanding. But as much as he was the center of attention, I couldn't help but notice the distance between us. He didn't look at me. Not even once. Maybe he hadn't seen me at all. Or maybe he had chosen to ignore me. As he always did. Either way, it didn't matter. And then there was Victoria. My older sister, poised and flawless as always. Standing next to Liam, our younger brother. They were a perfect picture of what our family was supposed to represent. Their lives were the epitome of success, of the Anderson name. And as I looked at them, I felt the familiar pang of being invisible. Of being a ghost in the very home I grew up in. They had everything, and I was nothing but the shadow they couldn't quite shake off. As I made my way across the ballroom, my heart pounding in my chest, my fingers brushed against the small table near the entrance. The name tags were neatly arranged, each one representing someone of importance. The name tags were like trophies, proof that you belonged in this world. But when I reached mine, it felt like I was staring at a scar. My breath caught in my throat. Anna Anderson, the family's burden. I felt a cold rush in my veins. A knot tightening in my stomach. Was this a joke? A mistake? I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone laughing at the cruel trick they had played on me. But then I heard it. A laugh. A sound so familiar it made my blood run cold. Victoria's laugh. She was standing across the room, holding a glass of champagne, her eyes gleaming with amusement. She wasn't hiding her pleasure at my humiliation. No, this was her moment to revel in the control she had over me. The control our family had always exercised. Come on, Anna, she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. Don't tell me you're offended by a little joke. Liam, always the smooth operator, was by her side, a picture of composure. Networking events should be fun. Anna, he added, his voice syrupy, don't take things so personally. The heat in my chest was rising. But I refused to let them see it. Not here, not now. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me. The discreet glances, the silent judgment. I could have exploded, shouted, demanded to know why my family was so hell-bent on destroying me. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I forced a smile, taking a deep breath and pretending not to care. I smoothed out the name tag, aligning it perfectly with the others. I picked up a glass of champagne from a passing server, my fingers trembling, but my expression was steady. If they wanted a show, I would give them one. I would not break. I moved through the crowd, my movements deliberate but detached. The mask I wore as polished as the floors beneath my feet. Each polite smile, each small conversation, each carefully curated exchange, it was all part of the act. Part of the role I was expected to play. The role of the daughter who didn't quite belong but had to pretend she did. This was my life, a series of performances, of pretending to be someone I wasn't in a world I didn't understand. As I reached the back of the venue, I stepped outside to the balcony, seeking solace in the cool evening air. The breeze washed over me, but it did little to calm the storm inside. I should have left. The moment I saw that name tag, I should have walked away. But something inside me held me there. Something stronger than pride, stronger than defiance. It was a feeling I couldn't explain. A weight that anchored me to that place. To my family. To the legacy they had forced on me. And then, as if the universe had decided I hadn't suffered enough, I overheard a conversation that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. "Strange how your mother just disappeared from the picture," one of the investors said, his voice low but deliberate. I froze, the words hitting me like a physical blow. "Life takes people in different directions," Edward replied, his voice calm, too calm. But the investor's next words made my blood run cold. And yet some disappear more thoroughly than others. I turned toward the conversation, my mind racing. Had my mother been forced out? Had she left voluntarily? Or had they made her disappear? The truth I had buried for so long, was clawing its way to the surface. I couldn't shake the conversation from my mind. It lingered, like a shadow that I couldn't outrun, following me everywhere I went. The chilling words, the way the investor had spoken about my mother's disappearance, there was something more to it. Something I hadn't been told. For years, I had convinced myself that my mother had left us, that she had abandoned me when I was too young to understand. But now, doubt had crept in. What if that wasn't the truth? I couldn't let it go. As much as I wanted to. As much as the fear of unearthing buried family secrets terrified me. I needed answers. I had spent my life trying to make sense of the broken puzzle that was my family. But now I was beginning to see the pieces shift. Something wasn't right, and I would uncover it. I slipped away from the crowd, trying to be unnoticed, though it was difficult in the cold, gleaming halls of the Anderson headquarters. I knew this building like the back of my hand, before I became the family's burden. This place was meant to be my future too. But now, it felt more like a prison. The walls were lined with glossy portraits of my father, with grand displays of success. And it all seemed so hollow. I walked down the long hallway where the offices were, each step feeling heavier than the last. I came to my father's office, knowing it well. It was large, imposing, and meticulously organized. His desk was always arranged in perfect order, an altar to his authority. But tonight, there was something different. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual for him. My heart raced as I stepped closer, feeling the pull of the room. Something was inside, something that had to be hidden. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open. The room smelled like leather and expensive scotch, a scent I had always associated with my father's power. But tonight, it felt suffocating. I moved quietly, glancing around the room, until I noticed something odd. The top drawer of his desk was slightly open, just enough to catch my eye. He never left his drawers unsecured, especially not with sensitive documents inside. With a sense of dread, I approached the desk and gently opened the drawer further. Inside, there were several neat stacks of documents, all business-related, but my fingers brushed against something different. A single, yellowed envelope was tucked between them. My name was written on it in familiar handwriting. I froze. This wasn't just any letter, it was from my mother. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. The envelope was worn, as if it had been handled countless times. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. I opened it slowly, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, I found a letter that would change everything. Anna, it began. I tried to reach you, but they never let me. I hope one day you find this. My heart pounded as I read the words. She wrote about the divorce. About how my father and Victoria had controlled everything. Even her ability to see me. They had twisted the narrative, ensuring that when she was gone, she would never be able to return. My mother had never wanted to leave me behind. It was all a lie. The tears came without warning. I had spent years believing that my mother had abandoned me, that she had walked away without a second thought. But the truth, the raw and painful truth, was that she had been erased. They had made sure of it. I could barely hold the paper steady as I read the rest. My mother spoke of how she had tried to contact me, how she had been prevented at every turn, how they had twisted everything to paint her as the villain, as the one who had left us. She had been afraid. She had been forced into silence. The weight of the letter, the truth behind it, crashed over me like a wave. It wasn't just about my mother. It was about everything, about the control, the lies, the manipulation that my father and Victoria had wielded over me, over us, for so long. I felt a presence behind me, and I spun around, my heart leaping in my chest. Isolde was standing in the doorway, her expression softening as she looked at the letter in my hands. You found it, she said quietly, her voice low. I nodded, my mind spinning. I didn't know they did this to her. To us. Isolde stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind her. Not everything, she said, but I had my suspicions. It wasn't just about the business. It was about controlling you. A mix of rage, grief, and betrayal surged through me. I wanted to scream, to lash out at everything that had been done to me, to my mother, but I couldn't, not now. I had to stay calm, stay focused. Why didn't you tell me? My voice was barely above a whisper. My heart was breaking. Isolde sighed, taking a step closer. Because you weren't ready to hear it, she said gently, and because they expect you to lose control. If you lash out now, they win. Understand? I clenched my jaw. I did understand, but it didn't make it any easier. The truth was out, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my clutch. I straightened my dress and squared my shoulders. This isn't over, I said, my voice steady, not by a long shot. The weight of what I had just uncovered was heavy, but I knew I couldn't afford to be crushed by it. I had to take action, to rewrite this story that my family had tried to control for so long. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore, it was about survival. For years, I had played the role of the family's burden, the inconvenience, the outcast, but now, I understood that it wasn't me who was the burden. It was them. The next morning, I was back at my desk, my fingers drumming against the surface of my laptop. The office, once familiar and comforting, felt cold and distant. I had spent too many years pretending to be someone I wasn't, trying to live up to a legacy that had never truly belonged to me. But now, I had the truth, and the truth was more powerful than any name on a business card or any label my family could slap on me. The first step in my plan was to gather the evidence. My mother's letter was just the beginning. I needed more, proof of the corruption, the money laundering, the manipulation that had tainted everything about Anderson Enterprises. I had contacts, people who specialized in uncovering the darkest secrets of the powerful. It didn't take long for me to find what I was looking for. I reached out to an old contact, a journalist who had helped expose corporate corruption in the past. Within hours, I had files, emails, and documents, proof of financial fraud, offshore accounts, hidden transfers. The Morrows had built their empire on lies. But the truth was in those files. And I was going to make sure the world knew. But there was more to this than just exposing the family's wrongdoings. It was about reclaiming my life. For years, I had been defined by them, by the Anderson name, by their expectations. But now, I was going to define myself. I was going to show them that I was not just a daughter to be controlled, a woman to be ignored. I was a force to be reckoned with. That evening, I was at the Anderson headquarters again, standing in front of a large conference table filled with the company's top investors. The room was immaculate, as always, but tonight, it felt different. Tonight, I wasn't just a bystander. I wasn't the person they expected me to be. As I walked into the room, I felt the eyes of every investor on me, their gazes shifting between curiosity and surprise. They hadn't expected me to show up, let alone to be the one to take control of the situation. I stepped to the front of the room, my heart steady, my mind clear. I placed a stack of files on the table with a deliberate thud. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the investors, the people who had built their wealth on the back of Anderson Enterprises. "Good evening," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "Before we proceed with today's agenda, I have something to show you." I pressed a button on a small remote, and the screen behind me flickered to life. One by one, the documents appeared: bank transfers, hidden transactions, falsified reports. The evidence was undeniable. The room erupted in murmurs, the investors' faces pale with shock. Some of them looked at me with disbelief, others with fear, but all of them were captivated by the truth I had just revealed. Magnus, my father, stood up abruptly, his face contorted with anger. "Anna," he said, his voice low and controlled, "you don't get to decide that anymore." I held his gaze, unflinching. "Oh, I think I do," I replied, my voice unwavering. "This is the truth. This is the legacy you've built. Let's see how long it lasts when the world knows who you really are." Lucian, my brother, jumped to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "You think this will change anything?" he hissed. "You're just a disgruntled daughter." I turned toward him, my gaze icy. "I'm not just a daughter. I'm someone who knows the truth. And the truth is dangerous." "Lucian, it's always been dangerous." The room fell into chaos. The investors demanded answers. The reporters pushed forward with their cameras. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I had finally taken back my power. And I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. As Magnus stood there, silent and defeated, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. My identity. The Anderson name no longer had any hold over me. I had taken control, and nothing, not even my family, could take that away. The investors continued to argue. The media swarmed, but I didn't need to hear them anymore. I had already won. The Morrows had spent years controlling the narrative, but I had just rewritten it. I walked out of the room, my head held high. The truth was out, and there was no going back now. The Morrow legacy had crumbled, and I was free. As I walked away from the chaos of that conference room, a sense of peace settled over me. For years, I had been trapped by the expectations of my family, living in the shadow of their lies. But now, with the truth exposed, the weight that had pressed down on my chest for so long was finally lifted. I wasn't the burden anymore, I was free. The world outside seemed different. The city lights flickered in the distance. But I didn't look back. I had finally found the courage to break away, to step into my own life without the fear of being controlled or manipulated. The Morrow legacy, once untouchable, had crumbled in front of me. It felt like the beginning of something new. Something I could now own, without the suffocating ties of the past. I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone. Not anymore. I had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people and situations that try to define you. Family may shape us, but it doesn't get to own us. As I sat at my desk, the phone buzzing with calls from reporters, from people who wanted to know more, I simply smiled. They wanted my story, but they didn't know the real story. I had just rewritten it. And now, for the first time in years, I was in control of my own narrative. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more life stories. Stay tuned for the next chapter. Take care of yourself. You deserve it.